Hashem, we're back again, Bein Koisla Beis HaMedrash, and every beginning of Chodesh Mar Cheshvan, I say it's a pleasure to be back in Beis HaMedrash with our steady Shiurim, even though Bein HaZmanim, especially Bein HaZmanim of Tishrei, to me is the biggest Torah of all year round. You know, Chol HaMoed, every day there are a few Shiurim, and every Shiur attended by hundreds of people. Throughout such a Bein HaZmanim, quite a few thousand people attend my shiurim, but it's always a simcha to come back to our blessed routine. So we don't have hundreds of people coming to the shiur, but this is a shiur kavua, and that is what is so special about it. People coming on a steady basis to a shiur, nishtasheh b'divrei Torah, and I see this as a big schus. So Parshas Lech Lecha, we start the story of Avraham Avinu. The first two Parshas in Torah's Moshe are about Odom and Noach, and that is the story of the world. But our story, the Jewish story, starts in Parshas Lech Lecha. And this is Chodesh Mar Cheshvan. And anybody that ever wrote a ksuba knows that Mar Cheshvan is not two words, it's one word. And the Hasidim say that Chodesh Mar Cheshvan is Maloshen Rechushe Merachshin Sefosov. And we could continue with the spirit of Tishrei, bringing it into Cheshvan. Moav Shomesh was a Talmud of Rabbi Melech Milezhensk. And he writes in Parshas Shmini that we have the ability to extend as if Chodesh Tishrei into Cheshvan, and that is the Lashon of Rechushe Merachshin Sefosov. And the Hasidim Kadmoinim had a siman. How do we know that we achieved the spiritual heights Tishrei? Hasidim Kadmoinim hoyu lehem ois. If your Chiddushei Torah and Cheshvan are better than all year round, that's a siman that you achieved Kedushas Elyonis. What would we expect from a Talmud of Rabbi Melech Milezhensk to say? How do you know you achieved the heights of Kedusha and Chodesh Tishrei? If you go to the mikveh every morning and you dip into the water 26 times, Keneged Shem Havaya. If you say 18 Pirkei Tehillim B'Kol Yom, some are surprised that a Talmud of Rabbi Melech Milezhensk says, Chiddushei Torah, that's your test. And if the Chiddushim in Mechadesh Cheshvan are special, are beautiful, that's a siman, Shesigu Kedushas Elyonis. I can't judge because I'm an Agei B'Dova, but if you will let me know that the Shurim I said on Cheshvan are better than all year, that'll make me happy, and I'll know that I achieved something in Chodesh Tishrei. So before we start learning today, today's sheet is dedicated L'Refuah Shleima Arav Reb Avraham Reuven Ben Yehudis. Kodesh Baruch Hu Yishlach Lo Refuah Shleima Min Hashamayim Yishid Marech Yomim V'Shonim with his family, and we should only share B'Soiros Tovos. So Parshas Lech Lecha, we start about the Asor Nisyonis Shenesnasa Avraham Avinu, and Chazal say Perikei of Masechet Tovos. Avraham was put to test by Kodesh Baruch Hu 10 different times. Va'omad bekulam. And some of the Asor Nisyonis on this week's Parsha, starting off with Lech Lecha, and that's an Asor of Golus, and culminating, coming to a climax with the end of the Parsha with the mitzvah of Milah. So today we will be discussing a very clear topic about mitzvahs Milah, but the sugya is not only about Milah, it also touches a far broader spectrum in halacha. So, as we all know, there is Milah B'Zmana, Milah Shaloi B'Zmana. Hiyoımhashmili Yimol B'Sar Erlosoi. And every father has a mitzvah, if he has a ben socher, if it is at all possible, to be mal, circumcise a son, Hiyoımhashmini. But if he didn't do so, for any reason, B'Meized B'Shoigig B'Oines, he still has a mitzvah of Milah Shaloi B'Zmana. And Milah Shaloi B'Zmana is also upon the child. if he gets to the age of bar mitzvah and he still wasn't nimoil, then the mitzvah goes over to him. And in Kedusha Daf Chof Tes, Chazal explain there are 3 different categories in mitzvahs Milah. First of all, it is upon the father of the child, and if a father didn't mal his son, or he couldn't, or an orphan that doesn't have a father, then the mitzvah is upon the beis din. And if for some reason nobody circumcised the child and he became a mitzvah, it is no longer upon the father, no longer upon the beis din, but upon the person himself when he becomes a bar chiyuva. Fascinating tshiva in Tashbetz, Chelik Beis Siman Ches. And the Tashbetz deals with an event, a story. A father was in custody, he was in prison. And 700 years ago from prison, you couldn't send a WhatsApp or an email or even an SMS or even make a phone call, and there was no kesher with the father. He probably didn't even know that he had a son. And the Tashbetz paskins, you do not do Milah b'yom hashmini, because it's the father's mitzvah, and nobody is entitled to take the mitzvah away from his father. And the father is in jail, so he's in oines echmona patre. You're going to wait till he gets out of prison. It'll take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, 2 months, as much as it takes. Unless we could notify the father and the father will make a shliach. That would be okay. But if the father can't do the milah himself and he can't make a shliach, we're not in touch with him, then we forego the mitzvah of milah bismano. And the argument of the Tashbetz is, yes, there is a mitzvah milah bismano, but that is the father's mitzvah, and no one else has a chiyuv. And if there is a father, and the father obviously probably wants to be mekayim his mitzvah, then beis din has no right to intervene, and there's no mitzvah on beis din. The mitzvah is transferred to the beis din only if there is no father, or a father is not interested in being mal his son. But as long as there is a father, and the father obviously, probably, in all likelihood, will want to be mal his son and perform his mitzvah, then beis din has no right to take away the mitzvah from him. So there are 3 different stages. Avia ben, beis din, and the person himself, if he's a bar chiyuva, a gadol, and he still did not have mitzvah performed. So today we are dealing with milah bismano and milah shaloi bismano. Milah bismano, the Gemara says in Psachim Daf Dalet, Kol hiyoımhashmini kosher lemilah, ela shezrizin magdimin lemitzvos. All day is this man. Hiyoımhashmini. There's a general concept, which is not necessarily by milah alone, but by all the mitzvahs. Zrizin magdimin lemitzvos. It is interesting that the Gemara shares this yisoid and halacha dafka by milah, even though they could choose any other mitzvah. Kol yom hashmini kosher lemilah, ela shezrizin magdimin lemitzvos. There's a machlokes between achronim. Milah shaloi bismano. Is every moment or maybe every day a bitul mitzvah saseh and avera, or milah shaloi bismano is the same thing? Zrizin magdimin lemitzvos. Milah bismano, you have 12 hours. If those 12 hours pass, milah is not kosher balayla, only biyom. Bitul mitzvah saseh, milah shaloi bismano, you have all your life. Is it also just zrizin magdimin lemitzvos? Some achronim say milah shaloi bismano, every moment you postpone is a bitul mitzvah saseh, and you have a chiyuv gomer to do it as soon as possible. It is only milah bismano that is zrizin magdimin, because milah bismano, the Torah says yom hashmini yom hashmini, you have all day. But if that day passed, every moment is a bitul mitzvah saseh. So Minchas Oshai dealt with a specific, fascinating question. Person had twins, and sometimes a few minutes transpire between brother A and brother B, brother Aleph and brother Beis. The first child, Yotzel Avir Oilam Ben Hashmoshes. Sofek Yom Sofek Laila. His younger brother came out, La'avir Oilam, to the world after Tzeisak Erchovim. 8 days later, which bris do we do before? Generally speaking, Pischei Tshuva, Reisha Mechesiv Kotentes, if two children are brought to the shul the same day for a bris, one is bismana, one is shaloi bismana, or both are shaloi bismana, the first to have the chiyuv is the first to have the bris. So Milah bismana would come before Milah shaloi bismana. If both are shaloi bismana, the one that was born 20 days ago comes before the one that was born 10 days ago. The first to have the chiyuv is the first to have the bris. We find the same concept in Yoredesim and Shinun Daled by Kvuras HaMeis. Sometimes in one morning there are a few Mesim. Shechanoch Paskins, first to die is the first to be buried. And that is the Seder which is upon the Chevre Kedisha. Famous story about Reb Chaim Brisker, and I share this story many times. Sometimes we deal with a question of principle in Darkei HaPsak, Darkei HaPsika. Could we learn from what is not written or only from what is written? This might be a machlokes between the Chazon Ish and Reb Chaim Brisker. Chazon Ish at the end of Chazon Ish Taharos, there are lekutim at the end of the Sefer. Amud Reish Tzadik Ches. We don't like to say Retzach, Rechatz. Reish Ches Tzadik, the Chazon Ish writes, that the Beis Yosef and the Torah never intended to teach us by omission. They only teach us by what they write, and we could never learn the halacha from what is not written. But the Chazon Ish in Shvius, Siman Zayin, writes, a relevant question that we do not find in the Poskim that they deal with this question, that proves that it's not a question. If there would be a psak, it should be written. So in my tshuvas, I try to reconcile what seems to be a stira between these two Chazon Ishes, but that's not our topic today. We'll have many opportunities. So the story goes about Reb Chaim. A person once came and brisked to Reb Chaim Brisker to complain and call the Chevre Kedisha to a din Torah. What happened? Asked Reb Chaim, and he said, my father passed away very early in the morning, and another person in the community passed away 2 hours later, and for some reason the Chevre Kedisha buried the other one before they buried my late father, Lo Aleinu. Reb Chaim was shocked, took out a Rambam, Hilchos Ovel. He was mine, a Rambam, and after a few minutes he said, they did something which is terribly wrong, but you have no complaint. The person didn't understand. If they did something wrong, why don't they have a complaint? He went home, he opened the Rambam, exactly where Reb Chaim looked in the Rambam, and he sees nothing. So he comes back to Reb Chaim and he says, Yelamdeinu Rabbeinu, I saw which page in the Rambam you looked at, and I learned through the entire Rambam, and I saw nothing. And it is strange what you said. They're wrong, but I have no complaint. So Reb Chaim explained. There's a sif in Shulchan Aruch that you need to bury the Mesim in order of their demise. Aval yesh le'estapik. Is that a din in Kvod HaMeis? Or maybe it's a general din in Kedima b'mitzvahs. If it's a din in Kedima b'mitzvahs, then it's the Chevre Kedisha's problem. It has nothing to do with you. It's not diminishing Kvod HaMeis. So they did something wrong, but you have no complaint. But if it's a din in Kvod HaMeis, then you have a complaint. And you have the right to call them to Beis Din. So I figured, let's look in the Rambam. If the Rambam brings it in Hilchos Ovel together with all the other halachos of Kvuras HaMeis, obviously a din in Kvod HaMeis. If the Rambam writes nothing about it, then it's a din in Kedima b'mitzvahs. I found nothing in the Rambam, so that to me is a raya that it has nothing to do with Kvod HaMeis. And that's why I said, they did something wrong against the Sif and Shulchan Aruch, but you don't have any complaint. So this is an interesting story, and it's about Darkei Hapsak. So would there be a difference between the Rambam and the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch? Not likely. I mean, they have the same status, as the greatest poskim, Amudei Halacha. But coming back to our sugya, so the Pischei Tshuva, in Kvuras HaMeis, it's the Sif and Shulchan Aruch, but by Milah, it's in Pischei Tshuva. Kvuras HaMeis, it is a more common question because in every town, in every city, in every community, is the Chevra Kedisha. And it is extremely common that sometimes in a big kela there are more than one mace every day. Look what's happening in a city like Yerushalayim. But by a bris, it's not so common because there might be 100 bris in the same day, but each one is in a different shul. It's not a very common phenomenon that in the same shul there are 2 children to be mal. It is very common by Gedolim. If you go to the Gera Besmedesh, they probably have 10 brisen every day. And I remember by Rabbi Yosef, every day there were a few brisen. But anyway, so the halacha is, if there are 2 brisen in the same day in the same shul, the first to come to Yom HaShmini is the first to be mal. And what is the din if both children in shul were born on the same day? Unlike Kavura, it doesn't depend who was born earlier. Both were born on the same day, so both have the Mitzvahs Milah in the same day. Tu achroinim, Yad Eliyahu, Shalas Tshuva Simen Mem Aleph Rabbi Yehuda Rav Alan, and Bris Avraham Simen Yud Daled deal with this question. And the Bris Avraham says, if both children were born in the same day, and that is usually Milah Bismana, I don't know who comes first. Mashi Yirtziyasa, called the Alam Gvar, what would we say? And he writes, Mishum Darkei Shalom, the first that was born earlier has the bris first. So if it's twins, there is no Darkei Shalom, because both are the same father and the same mother. And the Darkei Shalom is parents. This father will fight with the other one. Why did your child come before mine? So by twins, there would be no argument of Darkei Shalom. It is unlikely that we're concerned when these 2 little babies will grow up and they're going to be told, I was born first and you had a bris before me, they're going to fight around. That is quite unlikely. But nevertheless, first to be born is the first to have a bris. Our question is more complicated. The first baby was born Bein HaShmoshes. And when a child is born Bein HaShmoshes, the bris is always next day, not the day before. Because if you're mal a child before Yom HaShmini, you weren't Mekayim the mitzvah. So if it's a suffix when to do the milah, we always do it on day number 2. So the child that was born first is a suffix bismana, suffix shaloi bismana. The child that was born second is a vaday milah bismana. So what would the halacha be? First to be born is the first to have a bris. That is not really a halachic principle. It's just a minhag. And the Bris Avraham says, I don't know what the source of this minhag is. Or maybe Milah Bismana comes before Milah Shaloi Bismana. So the Yad Eliyahu says, you do Milah first, baby number 2. Why? Milah Bismana comes before Milah Shaloi Bismana. Why? He gives a few svaras. None of them are very convincing. Number 1, Todi v'she'enai Todi Todi koidem. And Milah Bismana is more common than Milah Shaloi Bismana. Not very convincing. After all, it's the same mitzvah. And in every source in halacha, when we deal with Todi v'she'enai Todi, we're dealing with 2 different mitzvahs. One is more Todi than the other. Both are mitzvahs milah. Mekudash. HaMekudash Mechaveira comes before Chaveira. Why is it Mekudash? Milah Bismana. Milah Shaloi Bismana is a b'di'evet. But that is not the definition of Mekudash. This is Milah and that's Milah. Svara number 3, Chaviva Mitzvah B'shato. Anyway, the Yad Eliyahu says the younger brother would have the bris first. I think his most compelling argument, which is also not very convincing, is we see by tefillah, when a person is chayav in tefillas tashlumin, first tefillas chayva, and then tefillas tashlumin. Milah shaloi bezmana is like tashlumin. Sefer HaRoikeach clearly writes, Milah shaloi bezmana is a gather of tashlumin. So chayva comes before tashlumin. That's the psak of the Yad Eliyahu. Dvar Avraham was the Kovner Rav, and he passed away in Ghetto Kovner before the Nazis murdered everybody of the ghetto. And the Dvar Avraham, Chelek Aleph in his Shuvah Simalamed Gimel, Chelek Beis, there's a big controversy with many Gedolim that disagreed with his psak, Chelek Beis, Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet, the first 4 Shuvas, and he argues. Baby number 1 has the bris before baby number 2. And why is that? Milah bizmano is only a din of zrizun magdiben. So you have time all day. Milah shaloi bizmano, every ikuv, every moment you push off the mitzvah is a bitul mitzvah sasei. And it's a mu'uvis lo yuchal etkon. Milah shaloi bizmano, you have a chiyav gomer to mal as soon as possible. And that is why first to be born, even though it's a suffix bismana, suffix shaloi bismana, will have the bis first. Because the father has a chiyav gomer, first to be mal milah shaloi bismana. Milah bismana could wait. It's only an Indian of zrizin magdim and mitzvahs. And in Minchas Osher, I disagreed with the Dvar Avraham, and I brought many rayas that it's not really a bitul mitzvahs asay. There's a fascinating tshuva in Noide B'Yehuda. So the Noide B'Yehuda Madura Tinyoni Yoredei Semakuf Samachvav brings a strange minhag. And many times you think, Achshar Dora. In some aspects, at least, our generation seems to be more normal than what people did many years ago. There was a place in which they pushed off all the Milah Shaloi Bismanas to Erev Pesach. And why is that? Because of Tanas B'chorim. There were Amaratzim, nobody made a siyum, and the B'chorim didn't want to fast. So whenever a baby was born, and for some reason they didn't do Milah Bismana, the B'chorim turned to the father and said, please make the bris Erev Pesach, and we're going to make a Suda, and we could all eat, because the B'chorim didn't want to fast. And that is what they did. Milah Shaloi B'zmana. Now, I doubt a child that was born Shviya Shel Pesach, they waited till next year of Pesach. That sounds crazy. Probably we're dealing with kids that were born in Chodesh Nisan, or maybe after Purim. And the B'chorim tried to convince the father, if you can't do Milah B'zmana because the child is too small, or it had an infection, then push up the bris. Let's do it Erev Pesach. We could all eat. We don't want to fast the Tanas B'chorim Erev Pesach. And the Noide B'Yehuda writes very harshly about this. And he writes, Zrizim Adim and Mitzvahs. How could you be mevatel Zrizim Adim and Mitzvahs? And if you're going to wait too long, maybe the child will pass away and you're mevatel Mitzvahs Milah. And he said, I was asked, I heard about this minhag, and I paskined that there is no bris shalo bismana erev Pesach. No. You can't do a bris shalo bismana erev Pesach. And that was like a gzeira to be mevatel this ridiculous minhag, pushing off a bris to erev Pesach. The Noide B'Yehuda made a takana, erev Pesach, only milah bismana. If it's a milah shalo bismana, even though they couldn't do it before, no milah shalo bismana erev Pesach. And this entire tshuva proves, Milah Shaloi B'zmana, if you push it off, it's not an Aveira Gemura. It's not Bitul Mitzvah Sasai. The Noide B'Yehuda clearly writes, you're going against the Halachas Rizim Adim and Mitzvahs. And if it would be Bitul Mitzvah Sasai, the Noide B'Yehuda can't make a takana that people should be Mevatel and Mitzvah Sasai. So this tshuva proves, Milah Shaloi B'zmana is not different than Milah B'zmana. it is preferable. You should do it as soon as possible, but it's not a chiyuv gomer. If it would be a chiyuv gomer, then every milah shalom bismana, you should get up early in the morning and look at your watch, and a moment after alois hashacha, not alois hashacha, maybe nates, you need to do the milah. And that was never a minig, to do milah shalom bismana without a minyan right after the nates. If it would be a bitul mitzvah to say every moment, then it is clear that that would be the halacha. You need to do the bris right after the nates. And Barav Am Hadras Melech wouldn't permit a bitul mitzvah to say. Shiur Reis Samach Vov brings a minig that the Bes Yosef brings, the sources of Tashbitz, that Milah Shalom Bismani you shouldn't do on a Thursday. Because Shlishi LeMilah is the most painful day, according to the Mesoris of Chazal. And it's also Tzara the Yenuka, and Tzara of his parents, and a Chashash they will need to be Machal Shabbos, might be a Sakona. So Milah Shalom Bismana you should never do on a Thursday. And the Shach disagrees with that Tashbitz. But once again, the Shach doesn't say it's a Bitul Mitzvah to say. If it's a Bitul Mitzvah to say, a Chashash, maybe you'll need to be Mechal Shabbos, is no heter to be Mevatla Mitzvah. If there will be a need to be Mechal Shabbos, the Pikuach Nefesh, there will be Mechal Shabbos. It's not a heter to be Mevatla Mitzvah. So for all these reasons, I don't think that the Avraham is right, that by Milah Shaloi Bismana you have a Chiyuv Gomer. Could I have a Rambam Ahavo? If there's a Shabsa Frankel Rambam Ahavo, that would be preferable. Somebody needs to know, whether it's for Amar and this Bismedish. But I quoted the Lashon of the Rambam also in Minchas Osha, so I'll try. Okay. So the Rambam writes, Perek Aleph Halacha Beis of Hilchas Milah. I'm quoting the Rambam from the Minchas Osha, it's okay. V'chol yoim v'yoim, shiyaver olav v'lo yomul, bitel mitzvahs asay. So the Rambam does write, Milah Shalom Bismana, kol yoim v'yoim shiyaver olav v'lo yolav, bitel mitzvahs asay. Some Gedolim argued, only if an entire day transpired, but not a minute, not 5 minutes. But if it's a bittul mitzvah to say, what is the difference between a minute or an hour or a day? Only b'yom hashmini you have a day. B'yom hashmini yom b'salosa. If it's shaloi b'zmano, then the Rambam in Parshas Mishnah writes a similar lashon, and he writes, "V'kol zman shelo yom aloisa v'yeh orel yeh over al mitzvah sasei she'egia zmano." So the Dvar Avraham quotes the Rambam, and he says, there is Rambam proves it's a bittul mitzvah sasei. And he writes, I heard that Reb Chaim Brisker said the same. Didn't hear it from Reb Chaim, but someone told me that Reb Chaim Brisker said the same. I proved from the Shach and the Noida B'Yehuda that that is not so, but I also wonder, I think the Rambam clearly contradicts what the Dvar Avraham understood from the Rambam. So, yes, the Rambam writes, Kol yom v'yom shi'aver olav, v'lo yomal bitel mitzvahs asay. But the Rambam in Parshas Mishnah, and I'm quoting the Lashon of the Rambam, Kol zman shelo yom aloisoi v'yeh orel yeh over al mitzvahs asay she'egia zmano. But then the Rambam writes, "V'kisheyomul afilu ba'achris yomav osa mitzvah v'sar mimeno ha'avoin." If at the end of the day, even after many years, he did do milah, ki a mitzvah v'sar mimeno ha'avoin. What does the Rambam mean, sar mimeno ha'avoin? Mekan ulahabo? Pshita. Shlit, that's Milah Shalom Bismana. It was Makayim the Mitzvah. What's the Revusa? So to me, it is clear, if at the end of the day he did Milah, he is not defined as a bitul mitzvah sasei, but rather postponing a mitzvah. Rambam Perek Aleph Halacha Ches. And I'm reading Perek Aleph Halacha Ches. Ein malen liyolev ele biyoim, achar alois hashemesh, ben biyoim ishmini shu zmano, ben shaloi bezmano, shu mitchi ve'elach, sheneemar biyoim ishmini biyoim ve'loi belaylo, ve'im mal meshe'ol ha'moed ha'shachar kosher, ve'kol yom kosher l'milah. Ve'yafal piken, mitzvah lahagdim, betchilas hayoim, zizim adim ala mitzvahs. This halacha in Rambam clearly deals both with milah bezmana and with milah shaloi bezmana. I'm reading the Rambam once again. Ein malen la'olam elo biyoim, achar alois ha'shachar. Bein biyoim hashmini, shu zmano, bein shaloi bezmano, shu mitchi v'halo. Ve'im mal meshe'olo ha'moed ha'shachar, kosher. V'yafal biken mitzvah lahagdim, mishum shezlizim magdim ala mitzvahs. So the Rambam speaks both about milah bezmana and both about milah shaloi bezmana, and he says, so these magdim ala mitzvahs, do it as early as possible. So I think when the Rambam writes, oiver al mitzvahs asay, or mevatel mitzvahs asay, it's not necessarily the normal havana of bitel mitzvahs asay. If a person didn't eat matzah all Leil Rishon Shel Pesach, that's bitul mitzvahs asay. If one day passed on Sukkot and he wasn't noitel lulav, that's bitul mitzvahs asay. Yom HaShmini passed and he wasn't mal benoi, that's a bitul mitzvahs asay of biyom HaShmini yimol b'sar alosoi. But sometimes the Rambam uses the expression of bitul mitzvahs asay when his avera is he wasn't mekayim a mitzvah, but it's not necessarily defined as bitul mitzvah. And an example would be Perek Tezvav in Hilchos Issues. Could I have a Rambam Noshim? Whoever brought this Rambam probably would find Noshim as well. So Perek Tezvav in Hilchos Issues, the Rambam deals with the mitzvah of Priya Orvia. So at one age, does a person need to get married? And the Rambam writes, Ben Shemoina Ose Lechuppah. And you have 2 years. Overall of Esrim Shono, Bitel Mitzvahs Asay. Yashikoyach. However, if he's into learning and he wants to learn some more, he could wait. Hu ish mitzvah al priya orvio. Ume'emesai hu ish neschayev b'mitzvah zu ben 17. Kiven she'avro esrem shona v'loi nosa isho, harei ze oiver umevatel mitzvahs asay. Oiver umevatel mitzvahs asay. Really? Where is it written that you must be Makayim the mitzvah till you're 20 years? The only Gemara is Kodesh Baruch Hu Yoshev v'Mitzapa, and if he's 20 years old, he didn't marry Tipach Hatzmoisav. But Tipach Hatzmoisav is an Indian Zguli. Nowhere do we find that there's a Chiyuv Gomer to get married before 20 years. Besides this Gemara that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says Tipach Hatzmoisav, we don't find that it's a Chiyuv. And the Rambam goes on to write, Ve'imo yo'oisik v'toyre v'tored bo, v'hoi mesyaro melisa ishu kadei shelo yitrach b'mezoynes v'yavatl min ha'toyre, harei ze muter le'esacher. He could wait. So, if it's a bitul mitzvah asay, how can he wait? Kol mitzvah sheyev shel asay sedei acherem is doichet al metoyro. So I prove from this Rambam that not always when the Rambam uses the expression, the words, mevatel mitzvahs asay, it is an aveira. But it is wrong. Ben Shemoines Lechuppah. It is impossible to say that everybody needs to get married on his 18th birthday or his 17th birthday. it's not like going into a store and buying an eslig. Finding a wife is somewhat a bit more problematic than finding an eslig. When you look for an eslig, the best one that's on the table, you buy. You look for a wife, it's not that simple. So the Rambam, with his Ruach HaKodesh, v'oimeg binosoi, says, Ben Shemoynes el Chuppah. So Chazal give you 2 years' time. 2 years should be enough. Talk to 100 Shetchanim, go 500 dates, you have 2 years. 2 years is a reasonable time. And Chazal say, Esrem Shona Tipachas Moisav. So the Rambam writes, if you didn't do it in 2 years, which means you're not doing something right. It's a mitzvah say, and it's a precious mitzvah. You should do more hishtadlus. But it is not what we define as bitul mitzvah say, in which you will be punished. It's not like a person that was mevatel mitzvahs matzah leil alav shel chag, or a day passed and he didn't put on tefillin, or a day passed and he wasn't noitel lulav, and a Shabbos passed without kiddush and avdola. That's bitul mitzvah say. But Milah Shloi Bezmano, it's more chomer than Zriz Magdim and B'Yom HaShmini, because Milah Bezmano, the Torah clearly says you have the day. B'Yom HaShmini Yomel B'Sara Losoi. Zriz Magdim and HaMitzvahs. I think Milah Shloi Bezmano is somewhere in between Bitul Mitzvah Mamish and Zriz Magdim. After all, the proper time passed. Your time is up. And therefore, Ra'ui L'Shtat, do it as soon as possible. But it's not a bitul mitzvah. And that is why you don't need to do it the first minute after the nates. And you could wait for your parents and wait to have a minyan. And that's why when people have this crazy minig to do Milah Shloi Bezmano Erev Pesach, the Noid Yehuda says, Shtei Madim al mitzvahs. He doesn't say you're a pusheya and you're an avarian. And this brings us to a fundamental question, which the only source I remember is a fascinating Chazon Ish at the end of Masechet Negoim. The very last paragraph in Chazon Ish Masechet Negoim, I think it's Siman Yud Gimel, Ois Yud Zayin, and the Chazon Ish Taharas and Negoim. The Chazon Ish is Mesupik. Taharas and Nega. Person has a Nega. He has a mitzvah v'huvo el ha-kohen. You need to come to a kohen and let the kohen see the nega. And the kohen, there's a process of taharas and nega. And this is relevant by nigay odom, by nigay begodom, and by nigay batim. And it's a mitzvah say. And the Rambam seems to be clear, it's a chiyuv. How much time do you have? Do you need to rush and invite the kohen the first moment you saw the nega? Because many mitzvahs say are defined by time and confined in a time limit. All the mitzvahs of Seder Yom, all the mitzvahs of Chagim and Moyadim. These are all defined as mitzvahs say shazman groma. So mitzvahs say shazman groma, including Milah b'Yom HaShmini, the Torah clearly says how much time you have. And if that time transpired, that is what we call bitul mitzvahs say. But taharas nega, the Torah doesn't confine this mitzvah in time. The Torah doesn't say when. So how much time do I have? And the same question arises by Milah Shloi Bezmano. We couldn't do Milah Bezmano. The child had an infection. Now it's Milah Shloi Bezmano. How much time does one have? And the Chazon Ish says, as long as he still has the ability to be mekayim the mitzvah, you cannot say bitul mitzvah say. So Milah Shloi Bezmano you have all your life. But it definitely is something you should do as soon as possible because it's Ois Bris Kodesh. It's Kedushas Yisrael. So do your best. Do it as soon as possible. But as a bitul mitzvah say, the Chazon Ish writes, as long as he still could be mekayim the mitzvah, then he still could be mekayim the mitzvah. And then the Chazon Ish says, maybe. And that's a gewaltige chiddush to me. Maybe it is totally subjective. And as long as a person plans to be mekayim the mitzvah, he has time. He's not considered a mevatel mitzvah say. But the moment he will decide, I don't want to do this mitzvah, that's a bitul mitzvah say, which is a gewaldige chiddush, because objectively, nothing has changed. The only thing that changed is in his mind. So 2 people had children, and both are milah shaloi bizmano. Both lack yiras shamayim. And both are not very excited. They want to wait for Yom Tov time when their parents are going to visit from America, and they're going to make a bigger party, and maybe there's an uncle that'll write a check so that they want to do them bris before he arrives. So one of them is just schlepping out, and he's not mevatel mitzvah say. And the other decided, I'm not going to do it, and he is mevatel mitzvah say. Objectively speaking, they're the same. The only difference is in their mind, in their attitude, and the Chazon Ish writes, a mitzvah that doesn't have a time limit, it is subjective. If a person decided, I'm not interested in doing the mitzvah, in that moment, that's a bitul mitzvah say. But as long as he does plan to do the mitzvah, it's a reason makdimin, but it's not a bitul mitzvah say, which is a big chiddush. So coming back to our question, the Devar Avraham says, twins that were born, and the first baby out was born ben Moshes, and the second was born lachat seisek echovim. So this is a machlokes between Yad Eliyahu and Devar Avraham. The Yad Eliyahu says, baby number 2 is bris number 1, because that's milah bizmana. Milah bizmana should come before milah shaloi bizmana. The Devar Avraham says the opposite. Milah bizmana you have all day, and it's only season my demon. Milah shaloi bizmana is bitul mitzvah say. According to what I just said, I don't know who's right. Because I do think milah shaloi bizmano is chomer tfei than milah bizmano. Because milah bizmano, after all, I still have time. The Torah says, b'yoim hashmini yemal b'sar alosei. Zriza makdimin. So zriza makdimin, many people, b'nei Torah, make a bris 1 o'clock because they don't want to cause bittul Torah. They don't want their friends to leave the kollel. And the Rosh Kollel won't let them out. And usually we wait for parents that need to arrive machutz le'ir, and it's still zriza makdimin. But milah shaloi bizmana, time passed, your time lapsed. So I think it is on a somewhat higher level than zriza makdimin. And that is why the Rambam does use the language bitul mitzvah. Kol zman she'over, over u'mavatel mitzvah say. And as I explained, I think there are 3 different levels, and therefore I don't know what comes first. Maybe the milah shaloi bizmana, even though I totally disagree with the Devar Avraham, it's not an avera, but maybe it should come before milah bizmano, even though milah, because as I said at the beginning of the shiur, the 3 svoros of the Yad Eliyahu, why milah bizmana comes before, are not very convincing. I don't think it's todir. I don't think it's mekudish, and it's not exactly the same concept as tfilas tashlumin. The choiv and tashlumin are on the same person, and that is the seder hatfila. Here we're dealing with 2 babies, and therefore tzorach yun. So this is not a very common shaila. I was never asked this shaila. Maybe I was in the very distant past. But it is an interesting shaila. Probably I would agree with the Yad Eliyahu. First we do the milah bizmana, and then the milah shaloi bizmana, probably. But, we can't ask the 2 little babies, which of the 2 would be mevater. I don't know. So this is an interesting discussion which is focused on mitzvahs milah, and we discussed the chiyuv of milah shaloi bizmana. Is it a chiyuv gomer as soon as possible, and every moment that passes is a bitul mitzvah say, or lav dafka? And this is a machlokes between achronim, and we dealt with the lashonos of the Rambam. So as I said at the beginning of today's shiur, Parshas Lecha is the beginning of our story. Many times I ask young American yeshiva boys, who was the first Rosh Yeshiva in history? The first Jew in history was the first Rosh Yeshiva in history. In Yom Hashchor Ches the Gemara says, "Miyameim shel Aviseinu lo poshu yeshiva mehem." Avraham zokan v'yoshe b'yeshiva, Yitzchak zokan v'yoshe b'yeshiva, Yankov zokan v'yoshe b'yeshiva. Avraham Avinu was the first Jew, and he was the first Rosh Yeshiva. And Avraham Avinu was a giant. Asor Nisyonis Nasnas Avraham Avinu Avraham Dikelam. Kiyam Avraham Avinu Kol HaTorah Kulat Sholini. No, that's a Mishnah Kedushim Pei Beis and a Gemara in Yom Hashchor Ches. Avraham Avinu was the first one to discover HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No one taught him. And he found HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rambam writes, Nikbetzu Elav Alofim V'Ravavois. Tens of thousands of people flocked to learn from Avraham Avinu about Emunah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we would expect Avraham Avinu to have a utopian life of blessing and nachas and calm and serenity. No, it was not to be. Again and again and again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put him to test. Asor Nisyonis Nisnas Avraham Avinu v'omed b'kulam. And what are those Nisyonis about? Many times I explained, Masa Ovos Yetzira Labonim. That is a lotion of the Ramban in his introduction to Chumash Shemos. Masa Ovos is not only Siman Labonim, Yetzira Labonim. Whatever the Ovos did affected all the generations of Klal Yisrael. And all the B'tzilas Nefesh we had throughout the ages, everything comes from the Ovos. The Medrash says, when Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah Masro Nafsham al Kedushas Hashem, and Nebuchadnezzar threw them into a fire, and B'derech Nes, they were salvaged, they weren't harmed. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Malachi HaShoros, Lechu v'nashku sifsoiseim shel avoiseim shel Eila, shemosro nafsham al Kedushas Hashem. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells the angels from above, Malach HaShoros, kiss the lips, not of Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yankov, shemosro nafsham al Kedushas Hashem. V'yohavto es Hashem Elokecha b'chol avavcha b'chol nafshecha, afilu noitles nafshecha. The Balam Torah writes that the letters V'ohavto are the same letters as Ha'avois. Ha'avois. So in this pasuk demands, requires, Afilu noitles nafshecha, V'yohavto Hashem Elokecha b'chol avavcha b'chol nafshecha moedecha. The Balam Torah writes V'yohavto is the letters Ha'avois. The Messias Nefesh of Avraham in his Asor Nisyonis gave the koyach to every generation. So in Gittin Daf Nun Vav, it's a sugi of Kamsa B'Kamsa we usually learn on Tisha B'Av. And everybody knows the story of a Yiddish mama that sacrificed 7 children when each was asked to bow down to Avodah Zorah. And each and every one of her 7 children quoted psukim of Avos Hashem, of Mesiras Nefesh, and they were slaughtered one after the other. And when her youngest child, according to the Medrash, she was a 3-year-old child, and she asked permission to kiss him and hug him before he is killed. And she kisses her baby, her child, and she says, Lech va'omartu l'Avraham Avinu, Ato akadatu mizbeach echad, v'ani akadati shiva mizbechois. What is she saying? Avraham Avinu, you think you're so great? I'm far greater than you are. If what she said is inappropriate, einodem nitpas al tsaroi. Who could imagine the turmoil, the pain of a mother seeing one child after the other killed in cold blood before her eyes? But if what she said is not appropriate, why would Chazal quote it? Chazal isn't a storybook. Chazal don't quote everything. If Chazal tell us this is what she said, it must be something positive. My understanding is she tells her child, look for Avraham Avinu up there. I understand that not everybody could come into Avraham Avinu's place. But those that are Moise Nefesh have an open door. No door is closed before them. And the mother tells the child, look up Avraham Avinu and tell him thank you. You had one akedo, ubekoichechu agadol. I had the strength and the courage and the ability to be oiked shiva misbachos. Thank you, Avraham. So when Avraham Avinu was Moise Nefesh, he gives the koyach of Mesiras Nefesh not to one mother and 7 children, but to thousands upon thousands in every generation, because we are a people of Mesiras Nefesh. Again and again and again. And all our koyches come from the avos. V'yohavta is the avos. And that is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu tested Avraham in so many different types of nisyonis. And the 10 nisyonis touch upon every part of the human soul and spirit, starting off with the Golus. And Golus is a terrible nisyon. Lech ma'artzacho, memoladetecho umebeis avicho. In human nature, a person feels a connection and a loyalty and a love to different magalim, different circles. His closest circle is family. That comes before anything else. Your children, your wife, your parents, your siblings. That is human nature. The second circle, which is somewhat more distant, is your friends, your society, people you grew up with. The third circle is nationalism, your country. Hundreds of millions of people throughout history have sacrificed their lives in crazy wars, fighting for their country. And Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham Avinu, Lech ma'artzacho, leave your land. And not only your land, moladetecho. Moledet in modern Hebrew is your land. But in original Hebrew, it is your social circle, where you were born, the people you grew up with. And leave your family and go. And Avraham says, where to? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, go. I'm not telling you where. Leave. And that is a great nisayon. And then the nisayon of warfare. The nisayon of famine and hunger. The nisayon of Ur Kasdim, which is the same as Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. And the ultimate test, which is the greatest nisayon, which is Akedas Yitzchak. Because throughout the generations, Galui v'yadua lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that as a people, as a nation, we will have all these nisyonis. We will have all these nisyonis. And that is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu was tested in all these different nisyonis, to give koyach for Klal Yisrael of Mesiras Nefesh throughout the generations. So when we learn Chumash Bereishis, we need to feel and understand. And we learn the story of Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak and Yaakov, their tefillas and their bakoshas and their sacrifice and their nisyonis. That is where we come from, and that is our koyach. Habitu el tzur chutzaftem v'makem esbor nukartem. That is who we are. That is where we come from. And Chazal say, Kol ha'holech b'darkei ovis, ani meskoim amorav b'schus ovis. And as long as we go b'darkei ovis and we try to adhere and learn from the ovis ha'kedoshim, Kadosh Baruch Hu will remember for us schus ovis and chazdei ovis. Biglal ovis Toshia bonim v'sovi geulo levnei v'neim. And the schus of Avishenu ha'kedoshim, we should be zoicha to a Yeshua Selomim, and we should all be zoicha together to see Pnei Moshiach Tzidkenu b'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.